I'm doing a series of video blogs as a follow-up to a special report to the Legislative Assembly I recently issued on the lack of capacity in the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Natural Resources. That's the money, the people, and the expertise necessary to do their jobs. To support that, I developed a number of case studies, and this is the third in the series of case studies that detail incidences where capacity is a problem. In this one, I want to focus on the Ministry of Environment and their responsibility with respect to water wells in Ontario. Many people who live in the cities don't even think about water wells, but the reality is there's about 750,000 water wells in Ontario, and about 10 to 20,000 new ones are drilled each year. You might wonder, what's the environmental issue there? Well, of course, a couple of things. Groundwater is the source of drinking water. That very much affects the people who utilize it. Groundwater often surfaces somewhere and becomes a surface water, our springs, our streams, and into our lakes. So what goes into it, the condition of that water, is very important to the environment. In fact, most of the rules around the laws around groundwater protection and well drilling relate to protecting those aquifers. Wells, when they're drilled, have the potential to allow contaminants down into the aquifer. And if you contaminate, it's not just contaminating the well, you're contaminating potentially a huge area and many other wells, because the aquifer, of course, moves and shifts and the contaminants flow with it. So one has to be very careful. Chemical contaminants, yes, but also bacteriological contaminants. They get down the well, they can make a whole aquifer unsafe for consumption. So we do have a set of rules and laws in place. We have about 700 well drilling contractors in the province of Ontario. They have to be licensed. There's the kinds of activities that are of concern are the actual drilling the well, to make sure it's done properly and it doesn't cause problems, doesn't cause infection, and cleaning to you disinfect the wells after you drill them. But also just general maintenance of the wells, pulling, you pull the pumps out of the wells periodically to service them and do various things, or improve the well somehow. All that work has to be done properly and has to be done according to standards and disinfection and proper procedures. And then finally, when a well is no longer in use, it has to be abandoned, because if you just leave a well, it's like an open wound, and any manner of things can get down that well and infect the aquifer. So there are laws requiring an abandoned well to be grouted and sealed in a very specific way. So it's a very technical area, and a lot is at stake. And one might think that it's the Ministry of Environment's responsibility to supervise and inspect and overview this. So who's doing it? How many people are doing this in the Ministry of the Environment? Well, some years ago, the ministry used to have 5 or 6 people who were specialized in this, the well inspector program they called it. And they were people, because it's a fairly technical area, and you really have to know what you're doing. And they would make spot checks on the well drillers, and they would go around and make sure, inspect their equipment and how they're doing it, and check their paperwork and check their licenses and that kind of thing, just to see that everything was being done according to the regulation. But some years ago, the Ministry of Environment, because of this constant constraint they're under, they're constantly trying to save money and do things differently because they have so little resources. They let all the well inspectors go. I think most of them retired and were sort of put on the street, but the function of a water well inspector doesn't exist in the Ministry of the Environment. Instead, they say they do the enforcement on a complaint basis. That means if someone calls up and complains that there's a problem with somebody doing something with a well, they'll send one of their general inspectors out to follow up. Well, of course, a couple things wrong with that. One is that the general inspectors are overloaded. They're not specially trained in some of the details of water well construction and such. And of course, who calls to complain there's something wrong with a well drilling? You can't tell. Only specialized people would know when something's going wrong with a well. So it's perhaps not a very satisfactory system to protect this valuable groundwater resource, which is the primary source of drinking water for millions of Ontarians. It is a real problem, and it goes back to this issue that the reason they're doing this is not because of any kind of malice or incompetence. These are sincere people in these ministries trying to do a job, but they had to make cuts somewhere because they're so constrained that some things had to go. And this was one program they thought that they could get away without having water well inspectors, and I'm not sure that's the wisest choice. I think we really want to protect the groundwater of the province of Ontario for future generations. We have to give this ministry enough resources that it can do the job that the public expects.